on an ordinary British high street lies a secret that reveals a 2,000-year-old act of extreme violence.
Now, at first glance, this soil might not look that exciting, but you'd be mistaken, because if you look closer, you might be able to notice a horizontal black layer. It's evidence of an ancient burning, of a massive fire. It's extraordinary physical evidence for one of the greatest, most infamous revolts in British history, led by a larger-than-life figure, a warrior queen, a dux femina, Boudica.
The city where this happened was Colchester, the first capital of Roman Britain, and a target for Boudica, who wanted to drive the new rulers out of Britannia. We only have the Roman side of Boudica's tragic, violent story. It's a classic case of history being written by the victors. But beneath the modern ground level, archaeologists are discovering actual physical evidence of Boudica's assault, including stunning artefacts, revealing the sheer brutality of her onslaught.
For glass to liquefy, you are talking intense flame, unprecedented level of destruction.
And the poignant tales of those caught up in the carnage.
There was potentially a sad end to this family.
I think despite that very sad ending, this is an incredibly rare find for Roman archaeology.
I've set out to discover what archaeology can tell us about Boudica's infamous assault on Colchester, a tumultuous event that turned the capital of Roman Britain to ash. Boudica's husband, the king of the Iceni, had been an ally of Rome, but following his death in 60 AD, the Romans tore up this treaty in brutal fashion. Tacitus, a Roman historian, records how soldiers and administrators flooded into Iceni territory, pillaging it and treating the people as slaves. And at the head of all of this infamous pillaging had been veteran Roman soldiers based here at Colchester.
They were the prime culprits who had pillaged Iceni territory, who had mistreated the local Britons. Does the archaeology support this? Well, for that, we can have a look at some bones.
Here at Colchester Castle Museum, curator Carl Mercer is going to show me some gruesome evidence.
Oh, right. Now, Carl, what's the story behind these?
These are believed to be two Celtic Britons who were possibly killed and persecuted by the Romans here in Colchester.
Wow. And how can you tell they were killed? Are there any injuries that you can see?
Oh, some quite obvious injuries. This is the good stuff. So on this skull here, we can see a lovely indent. Right in the centre of the forehead.
Yeah, look at that.
So the story I've heard is that's potentially a gladius pommel to the bottom of a Roman
sword
sword,
pommel, yes.
Smacked right on the forehead, causing that damage. And on this skull here, you can see a pretty obvious cut.
Yes, look at that indent
in
right
the
there.
back of the back of the skull right there. A decapitation gone slightly wrong, trying to cut the head off and taking a nice slice out of the skull. I mean, we also have this humerus here that has sword damage to it as well, cuts and things like that.
The skulls date to before 60 AD and were found in a ditch that belonged to the old Roman legionary fortress at Colchester. It has led some to suggest that these skulls were the heads of unruly Britons who had consequently been executed, decapitated, their heads then put on public display as a warning to others.
We do have the evidence on the bones of cuts with no healing that indicate they would have been decapitated. Why would Romans have done that, if not to put on a grisly warning to the rest of the Britons around not to behave quite so unruly?
So in that regard, in Tacitus, he mentions how one of the key causes of Boudica's revolt was this great mistreatment of the local Britons, of the Iceni and others in that area. Could this potentially, therefore, be physical evidence of that mistreatment?
That's certainly what the evidence seems to suggest. With the establishment of a colonia, of the colony, the legions, the veterans, they want land, and they want money, and they want lives. And the unfortunate thing is that has to come from the people who were already established here. So there would have been some resistance to the Roman occupation and them taking the land. And there, as you said, Tacitus gives us plenty of examples of mistreatment of those people and mismanagement of the situation. So yeah, it seems very likely that that's what was occurring here, and this is evidence of that.
It was ultimately this mistreatment that helped Boudica rally tens of thousands of Britons to her cause to revolt against the Romans. These remarkable finds not only act as evidence of Boudica's rebellion, but they've also proven incredibly important for archaeologists wanting to date similar designs. The charred and melted objects were extraordinary discoveries on their own, but there is one particular set of items that I'm dying to get my hands on.
Ben, these look absolutely incredible. I can see them glinting from really far away. I mean, what's the story behind these objects?
So these are just a few of the objects that are part of a collection of objects that we call the Fennec Treasure. So these are Roman objects that were found buried under what is now Fennec's department store on the High Street, which used to be part of the Roman town. And these objects, we think, probably belong to a man and a woman who lived on the High Street almost 2,000 years ago. But unfortunately, in around 61 AD, they buried this collection of their treasures and were never able to return to recover them.
Ben, talk to me a bit more about the discovery of these objects themselves, the excavation. What do we know about that?
Yeah, so it's that classical kind of mythological almost story. So the excavations in 2014 were coming to an end. In the final few hours, whilst the archaeologists were excavating, there was a glint of gold that was seen in the dirt. And so they decided, well, actually, we shouldn't stop. Maybe we should carry on a little bit. And gradually, they found bits and pieces of this treasure.
The objects that make up the Fennec hoard were not found on their own. Alongside the treasure, archaeologists unearthed the feet of a small box, possibly a fabric container of some sort. It revealed how the people who buried this treasure had deliberately hidden it in the ground for safekeeping, only to never return and retrieve these stunning items.
Well, let's have a look. They look absolutely incredible. I'm guessing, therefore, this is complete gold, is it? Possibly silver?
Yeah, so we've got a mixture of objects that were found in the treasure. A lot of gold, so these objects here are gold and these earrings are gold. This is silver, and we've even got some copper alloy or bronze objects that were found as well.
Well, let's go straight in with the gold. I hope you don't mind if I pick up this bit
Go
right
ahead.
here. It looks absolutely incredible. And much heavier than you think as well. I mean, it's immaculate. What exactly is it?
So it's a gold armlet or bracelet, the absolute height of fashion. And the weight is because it's quite heavily gold. So it's about, we think, 95% gold. And you think about modern day gold, 9-carat gold jewelry you might buy in shops is only about 34, 35%, something like that. So it's much more pure gold than any of the sort of jewelry we really have today.
These bracelets, or bangles, were high-value items, ancient Roman bling. Similar designs have been found in places all across the Roman Empire, including in Pompeii.
Are there any other objects from this hoard that we can see similarities with other treasures from elsewhere in the Roman Empire?
Yeah, so if we stick with the gold, we have these gorgeous earrings.
Oh yes.
So these are similar to examples that have been found in places like Pompeii once again. They're found in Greece, and also there are examples of mummified remains from Egypt at the Roman period where you have portraits of people who were deceased at the time. And there's an example of a woman who has pretty much exactly the same earrings in one of those. So much like the bangles, they're clearly a sign of power and prestige and wealth during the Roman period across the empire. And you can see the hook is a really interesting shape, so it fits quite neatly underneath the earlobe. So it would have been very secure for whoever was wearing them. Clearly they didn't want them stolen, and you can see why.
So there you go, ancient Roman fashion right there.
The people who buried this hoard were evidently very wealthy. But how did they gain their riches? One stunning silver object may well hold the key.
So this is an armilla. And an armilla is a military award that's given to Roman soldiers at various different stages throughout their career. But this one is particularly fancy, particularly well decorated. They've worn away a little bit over the years, but that's the Capitoline Triad.
Oh,
so it's
right.
the three supposedly most important gods in the Roman pantheon. And so they've been put on the front there. And there's designs running around the edge as well. You have animals, you have intricate designs all around this object. So that shows that they must have been quite high rank by the time they retired, or at least by the time this object was buried in the ground during the Boudican attack. And you can imagine when they were first made, this silver object would have been even more impressive to someone who was wearing it at the time.
The artefacts seem to hint that the people who buried these treasures were a man with a strong military connection, perhaps a retired Roman soldier, and a woman, perhaps the man's wife.
Then we have some rings, and the rings tell us something extra maybe. So we have this example of quite large ring with an emerald stone set into it.
That's an emerald.
So this could have belonged to the man who was living here at the time, just because of the size. But we also have this lovely example with a dolphin.
Oh yes, right
So you
there,
can see
intricately
there.
carved. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
very,
yes.
very finely decorated dolphin design on the front of this one. And perhaps they really like dolphins. Perhaps they came from the Mediterranean where you get dolphins, and this is something to remind them of where they came from. But this one, simply by its size, has suggested that perhaps there was also a child.
Really?
There may have been a child in this household who would have been given this very small ring. The stone is missing on this one, but probably all the other rings had emeralds on, so they probably had an emerald as well. Perhaps it was a family tradition to have emerald rings given to you at different points in your lifetime. You have objects from the entire family now reflected in one group of treasures that were found on the high street during the Boudican attack.
It's rather poignant. I know this is precious metals, but from what you were saying there, you know, potentially the dad ring, the mum ring, and the child's ring.
Yeah.
And then trying to learn more about their story. Of course, we have this today because of the Boudican revolt, because they never came back to retrieve this hoard.
Yes.
Do we think that there was potentially a sad end to this family, or how they got caught up in the Boudican revolt?
I think we're going to have to assume that. But despite that very sad ending to their story, this is an incredibly rare find for Roman archaeology, especially around the Boudican attack. A lot of the material you find relating to Boudica is quite general. You find burnt pottery, you find burnt food, and that kind of shows you, okay, there was mass destruction, there was lots of things going down, but you don't get those individual stories. Whereas this gives us a snapshot of the lives of possibly a family, at least a few individuals living in one household who were unable to return to retrieve their treasures when Boudica attacked the town.
It's poignant evidence like this that really highlights the brutality of Boudica's vengeance here, destroying not just houses and property, but entire families too.
Boudica's revolt ultimately failed, but not before she and those that had rallied to her had dealt the Romans serious damage, killing tens of thousands of people and razing to the ground at least 3 settlements. But this wasn't the end of Roman Colchester's story. After dealing with Boudica and her followers, the Romans embarked on a massive rebuilding program in Britannia. They returned to the places that the Boudicans had torched to the ground, including here at Colchester. Evidence for this is just outside.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.